Did you know that South Africa's very first bottle of Pinot Noir was bottled in 1927 by George Cannett, who was then the owner of Moratti Estate in Stellenbosch? Now, roughly 100 years after those Pinot Noir vineyards were planted, the George Cannett's tribute Pinot Noir from Moratti still wins the odd award, at least on the local scene. But for the most part, South Africa's most celebrated Pinots and Chardonnays come from either Elgin or Walker Bay. Of course, in Burgundy in France, Pinot Noir wines have been made for almost 2,000 years. But a little like Helen Mirren, they only really became super cool in their old age. Today, in Burgundy, the biggest names in the industry deliver to market some of the most expensive wines in the world. But this wasn't always the case, because roughly 40 years ago, Burgundy certainly wasn't high up on the list of wine tourist destinations. And in fact, Burgundy was probably to Bordeaux back then what Screamer, Alabama is today to New York City. If Master of Wine JasperMorris's recollections of the 1960s in Burgundy are to be trusted, then the region was seen less as a source of superb fine wine and more as a region that was capable of producing the odd, good, hearty Burgundy. But he went on to point out that many of the wines that were deemed good, hearty Burgundies had more often than not been topped up by richer, inkier wines from the Languedoc region on the south of France, or from Algeria, which I guess at the time was the deep south of France. Mostly because, well, no one really wanted to drink the insipid Pinots of the age. But by the 1970s, I guess, people around the world were cottoning on to the fact that the less is more vibe can be a thing. And so over the subsequent decades, these lighter styles started to get appreciated a little bit more, and as the appreciation grew, so did the prices. By the 90s, the prices were growing so extraordinarily high that the wines had all become completely irrelevant to the vast majority of wine drinkers around the world, mostly because they really were only accessible to the ludicrously wealthy elite. Now, part of the reason was, as I said, because the appreciation for the Burgundian style was growing around the world, but also because Burgundy was legitimately producing some incredibly sublime wines. But another, probably more important reason was the fact that Burgundy wines were now being seen as vehicles for financial investment, and rightly so. To give you an idea, there was a case of La Romani Conti, which 1988 vintage, which got sold for about £3,000 at the time of release. In 2017, another case of La Romani Conti 1988 sold for almost £200,000. So as I said, at that price level, the wines are, for the most part, irrelevant to the wine drinking world. But it should be noted that the slightly older wine professionals around the world, like JasperMorris or South Africa's Michael Friedgen, who were there at the start where they could drink all the good stuff before it got ridiculously expensive, all seem to agree that the hype around Burgundian reds was thoroughly justified. And we've been indulging these aimless musings about Burgundy and Pinot Noir because today's hand-drink solo wine of the day is a Pinot Noir from Highlands Road Estate in Elgin, and it is produced by winemaker Vanessa Simkes in what was her very first vintage at Highlands Road. As I mentioned, Highlands Road is situated in the elevated ward of Elgin, which is southeast of Stellenbosch over the Overberg, or northwest of Walker Bay, if you prefer. This tiny little region really does punch far above its weight, especially in the categories of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, although it is probably true to say that for the most part, Walker Bay still carries the most heft when it comes to international buyers looking to find New World Pinots and Chardonnay from South Africa. That said, it was an Elgin estate, Lothian estate, who most recently won themselves a gold medal at the Decanter Annual Wine Awards. Then again, wine medals aren't everything because some of South Africa's most exciting Pinot producers don't bother entering competitions. And so, in some senses, the only way to really discover what the best Pinots are is to drink more Pinot. And why not start with today's wine of the day, the Highlands Road Pinot Noir 2015. Now, when we give this guy a sniff, well, we get quite a mature nose. That is to say, it's a nose that is packed full of tertiary notes, which is, I guess, to say that it's a nose that is full of aromas that really are only developed as a result of long time in the bottle. Notes like sweet raisins, some dried flowers. There's also some savory, meaty elements, and even a lovely fresh potting soil note, which you could call petrichor if you were feeling fairly douchey. But then moving backwards from tertiary to secondary, there's also some oak-derived notes. There's a lovely cedarwood element and a little bit of cinnamon, and this will make sense because the wine was in fact matured in oak barrels. And then when we do finally get to the primary elements, there are lovely red berry notes, strawberry, cherry, a little bit of raspberry sherbet. But it's worth noting that those fresher fruit notes have kind of morphed away to becoming more like strawberry preserve or perhaps cherry candy. Now, when we give this guy a sip, well, we know that what certainly hasn't waned over the time is this really delightful sour cherry brightness, which is superbly juicy. And then, being a Pinot Noir and having had some time in the bottle, the tannins are almost non-existent and the mouthfeel is supremely silky. I wouldn't say that this is a wine that's going to get better with age. I would serve it up now and enjoy all the benefits of a cellar-aged Pinot Noir without ever having to have developed the self-control that is required to practice delayed gratification. If you have any questions about Pinot Noir or Elgin or Walker Bay or Highlands Road, then drop them on the site and I will get back to you as soon as possible. If you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars that are coming out of the dynamic South African wine.